Welcome to the London Commercial Offices podcast with me, your host, Steve Berridge, Managing Director at Fidgens Cost Management. This is a podcast where we share the stories, career paths, lessons and insights from some of the industry's most influential people. Anything contained within our podcast should not be considered professional advice, and if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe or follow buttons to ensure you don't miss any of the amazing guests we've got coming up. It also really helps us grow the show. Thanks. Today I'm joined by Liam Spencer, co-founder at Anomaly Architects, a London-based design studio with a track record for creating amazing commercial spaces across the UK, passionate about retrofitting existing buildings. Liam, welcome to the show.
Fantastic to be here, Steve. Looking forward to it.
Lots to cover today, but as you'll know from all of the other episodes that I'm sure you've binged by now, I like to start right back at the beginning. So talk to me about a young Liam. Was architecture always the plan?
I think the first spoiler alert here is that I never actually had a deep-rooted or burning desire to sort of be an architect or do architecture. I think some people have that from the outset. They tell the stories about sort of building Lego and wanting to sort of do this big sort of dream. And I think, to be quite honest, that never really existed when I was a kid. My dad was a very practical man, or is a very practical man. He sort of worked on building sites as we were growing up. Me and my brother often talk about that. We have this very sort of vivid memory of him sort of coming home every day, very tired, very dusty. And sort of that kind of practical side was always there, coupled with my mum, who was a midwife, and then sort of did a lot of degrees and diplomas as she was working. So it's this sort of, from the outset, a coupled balance between very practical and academia from almost my earliest memory. So I think that probably will come up a few times during this, that sort of interplay between the two. But yeah, there wasn't a sort of a burning passion to do architecture. I suppose as a child, I was always quite curious. I think the way sort of my mum describes it, it wasn't unpicking things practically, but I was always really interested in the story behind something, or the way something came together, and the kind of narrative. And I think, again, that plays into particularly where we are as a practice now, that sort of curiosity.
Were you practical as a kid? Were you out there in the mud, or were you?
I think I was more thoughtful. I think the kind of academic side probably came through first. So I went to a really great state school just outside York. I suppose in a way a bit of a kind of an all-rounder, in the sense that I didn't have one area of sort of school or academia that I was really, really into. It was more, I was actually interested in the whole picture, certainly as balanced in sports, in music, things like that. And actually just, I suppose, exploring where my balance was. And again, if you sort of fast forward to the architecture element, we kind of have to do a lot of that in our day-to-day now. And I think the more I look back, and this sort of thinking ahead of this podcast has been great, actually, to those early things that probably I didn't think at the time were leading me towards architecture, I actually have. So that sort of element of being a bit of an all-rounder, interested in lots of different things, communicating things in different ways, certainly, actually, when you see it in hindsight, has led to it. So yeah, at school, I didn't really specialize in anything, but did well academically at sort of GCSE and A level. And like I said in that spoiler, all my A levels were actually tailored initially towards more kind of medicine or science. So did sciences, and had kind of the balance of art and English there, that I suppose, again, looking back, I was clearly clinging on to some sort of creativity. So when it came around to UCAS time or choosing a degree, it actually came quite late to architecture.
So was medicine a legitimate sort of pathway that you were considering at that point in time?
Yeah, I'd obviously seen my mum through midwifery. I had a few friends that were going down the kind of medical pathway, and it felt like the right thing to do. And I suppose if I weigh it up now, it was, I guess what I was looking for in a degree was that balance of academia, a bit of a vocation. So actually it leading towards something. I knew I didn't want to do something as broad
generic
as, say, history or, as per your previous podcast, sex and pleasure, like Chris Hunt. But maybe, again, that's a pathway some people...
You did say that you were going to drop that into this episode, so well done.
I did. Yeah, I managed to get it in.
I'll take
But yeah, so when it actually got to that kind of UCAS time, I went on a few sort of school visits in terms of different architecture schools around me and sort of wider afield. And I suppose what I saw was that, like, yeah, that real balance there, but also that it had a root in a vocation that you could point towards a profession and, yeah, sort of be inspired by something. And then quite quickly, I guess my passion for architecture really accelerated. So the more I looked into it, the more I realized, okay, yeah, this is actually what I could be good at, or certainly what I want to be good at, because I can balance, I guess, my appreciation for design and arts. I can balance my creativity in the sense of writing or talking or communicating, because it's such a part of that job. But then also from a practical point of view, the sort of physics side, the practicality
The
would
structural
still
nature
come
of it.
through too. Exactly that. So yeah, I initially went to Edinburgh, and that was fantastic. Like a great city all round. And it was the first year that they'd combined the art school and the University of Edinburgh. So the Edinburgh College of Art and the University of Edinburgh sort of came together to create sort of an architecture school between them. I mean, it was chaos in the sense that I think they did it overnight, and we had about 7,000 students in the first year, and a real mix of, I guess, the old school Edinburgh College of Art tutors who are more creative, quite cavalier, and the red brick of the Russell Group, Edinburgh University, sort of pulling and pushing together. Met a load of really, really great people there and had a really great time up there. But I think towards the end of the degree, as you start to think about, I suppose, your professional experience and where you might want to go, Edinburgh was it's a tricky city to work in. It's a UNESCO site, so a lot of the smaller one-man or two-man bands struggle with a lot of the limitations that actually what you can do in the city. There's a lot of internal refurbishment, but there's not a lot of kind of bigger projects happening. And then the more, I suppose, corporate or commercial stuff is, or certainly when I was there, is pushed to the fringes. And there was a lot of big banks and business parks and things like that, which I certainly didn't want to stick around in. So at that point, realized that London was where I'd need to get down to. And at that point, I was introduced to a former boss of mine, Matt White, through a friend I had at university called Honey. He was one of the original partners at Make, and he'd gone out to the Middle East and come back and set up a practice. I met him and clicked pretty much straight away in terms of we had a very similar mindset. And again, using this sort of podcast as a bit of a time to reflect. Again, Pete and I talk about this quite a lot. He certainly inspired quite a lot of our commerciality and our thinking as we were sort of forming maybe who we wanted to be within architecture. Yeah, so I think the exciting thing when I first came down to London and started working with him is location-wise, he did a lot of work with Soho Estates, and he'd taken a studio above the Burger King in Leicester Square. And
right.
For everyone who sort of has the pleasure or displeasure of walking through Leicester Square will realise it's quite an interesting place. And I think it used to be Burger King's sort of management training school or part of their back office function. And the sort of big curveball about the office was that you had to access it through Burger King, which was an experience at 7 a.m. in the morning. It was certainly an experience leaving. But Matt, again, going back to that sort of storytelling and narrative point, would describe it as a Mr. Ben style experience of sort of walking through the back door of somewhere and going into this architecture studio. So beyond the sort of burgers and buns that you'd see every day, sort of getting up to the space, it was really great because for a young or a new practice, they were working on some amazing things. And at the time, they'd partnered or through a sort of JV agreement on a job with the architecture practice Soda. So Russell and Laura there, again, as a sort of counterpoint, we're working on a lot of things together for Soho Estates, and obviously Soda have gone on to become an incredible practice, and again, some one that me and Pete look up to very regularly. But we were working on things like Walker's Court, so the Raymond Review Bar in the centre of Soho, I suppose the start of, if you like, true Soho in its purest or impurest form, transforming the space around there into what is now the Boulevard Theatre, Alona Rose House on Charing Cross Road, so a really big commercial office. But again, I suppose the entire time I was working there as effectively a sort of a new grad, Matt was very trusting in what I could do. And I think in architecture, there's often that perception, and I think it is true, that it's an old man's game, that this sort of level of experience comes with clients, comes with trust. And actually to be able to be a 22, 23-year-old kid basically running projects myself, because Matt had that trust in me, but also the similar sort of mindset that it doesn't actually need to be like that. it was a really sort of eye-opening experience to what was possible. Yeah, just that background from him of that. I say shameless commerciality. That sounds a bit crass, but I think it's actually more of just an understanding that you need someone to pay the bills and pay for jobs, and actually jobs don't make sense if they're not commercial. So he had this desire to get things built, which again is really ingrained into our sort of mindset, and yeah, how actually that sort of recognition from clients is much more important. He's got this great adage, which again sticks with us, that when we were talking about marketing and advertising, he sort of, as a throwaway comment, said that clients read Horse and Hound, not Architect's Journal. And that was a real eye-opening point to be like, okay, if there's a great thing about peer recognition when you've got a good project, but if you want to appeal to clients, actually the Evening Standard, Metro, more sort of mainstream media is where you should be focused in. And I think a lot of architects or architecture practices miss that, and they get so fixated with, okay, I need my peer recognition. It's that balance between art and science, right? That certainly exists within architecture.
I suppose you get that instant gratification from peer recognition, whereas putting something out, let's say, into the Horse and Hound, actually is, you're not going to get anything back from that. You know, yes, you might get a job down the road, but you're not going to get that dopamine hit from your peers liking it as such.
I think there's a bit of conflict there, right? And it's this, again, you could see it in Edinburgh, and eventually when I went on to do my part 2 at Westminster, you could see it there as well, that a lot of people are struggling with, am I doing architecture because it's an art? Am I doing architecture because it's a science? Am I doing it because I want a profession out at the end of this? And then when you get to that sort of, okay, you go off into the world and do your own version of it, it's amazing to see how broad the spectrum is, from people having very beautiful sort of artistic led practices, being very selective about their jobs, through to, I suppose, understanding the commercial end of it and pushing into the, I suppose where we are actually in that commercial led client base. And that with that, you, I suppose, have to sometimes drop some of your artistic backbone just to make a job work. And then you've got the spectrum in between, which is, it's sort of fascinating. So as I sort of went back, did my part 2 at Westminster again, I was exposed to some really great people there. Stuart Piercy was one of our tutors. Piercy & Co. obviously been probably my favourite London-based practice, and sort of a great tutor. I think we didn't exactly see eye to eye all the time at university. I think he's got such a high standard of what kind of craft is, and at the same time running this practice. And I think I had my own views on sort of commerciality, but hopefully we've got sort of a mutual respect at the end of it now, that actually we were both sort of heading in the same direction, maybe just in a slightly different way at the time. And actually that sort of degree again exposed me to that balance between academia and practicality. So I really sort of indulged in the sort of dissertation levels, the sort of education, thinking, reading, but all the while I was still working at MAT. So I was sort of trying to balance studies with professional work, I guess, badly at times, because I think the two don't really a full-time degree and a full-time job in theory don't add up to a sort of healthy lifestyle. But I suppose what it did frame for me is a realization that I was trying to bring the two together. And the fact that I was willing, I suppose, going back to the point about my dad and this kind of strife and hard work and work ethic, I really wanted to get the most out of it and push towards, I guess, my version of architecture, I guess, or my own professional life. So when that all sort of wrapped up and I started working back full time at Met, we were doing more and more really interesting stuff. And I think around that time, there was a
what
real
sort of
shift.
time was this in terms of age-wise for you?
So I suppose I was 24 when I finished part 2. So that's like 2012, 2013 time. So London was in a really good moment in terms of energy. It'd just been the Olympics. I think it was a great time to be around in the city. From a work perspective, we were doing more and more refurb-led projects. And I think at that time, I realized that this is something that is starting to interest me. The sort of big glass blocks and the sort of towers that I guess Matt's previous foray into the sort of Middle East had explored didn't really interest me as much as sort of taking a building that was existing and sort of looking at its bones, what you could do with it, how you could extend it. And we had a few projects around that time that were really, I suppose, inspiring and maybe the start of our journey as Anomaly now, because at this time I met Pete, so business partner Petr Esposito. Again, spoiler alert number two, we weren't best friends straight away. We weren't star-crossed lovers. There wasn't this sort of moment of, oh yeah, I need to
Your
start a
eyes
practice
met
with this
across the
guy.
table.
Yeah.
So did you meet Pete as in he worked at Matt with you, or?
Correct, yeah. Yeah. So Pete loves to tell this story that he actually took my desk on day one, and I was raging about it. I was very, very angry. But no, since then we've made up a little bit. But yeah, we were working on some projects together down in Wimbledon. So there was a project called Pinnacle where initially we'd just been asked to look at refurbishing it, painting it black, like I think every building at that time was starting to do. What we realized, or certainly what we were pushed into, is you could do a really heavy retrofit on that in terms of additional floors, additional massing. And everyone who's sort of in the Wimbledon area, it's quite, I mean, I don't think it's the most good looking project we've ever done, but it was impressive in the amount of extra area that could be added to it. So that was a real kickoff point. And then on the balance of that, we had Wellington House, so further up in Wimbledon for Columbia Threadneedle. And again, that came from a very, very similar brief where the building was on a sort of corner plot. It just wanted to be sort of refurbished. And the identification that there was quite a large car park behind it, based on the streetscape around, coming back to that storytelling point I mentioned earlier and narrative, actually you could tell a really good story about this being an important corner site, and that by taking it back to frame and completely recladding it, you were actually improving the streetscape, you were improving the architecture of it. And client Alex from Columbia Threadneedle really bought into that, and in a really nice way, as did the area. And I think it was that, again, that kickoff point of, okay, architecture can actually do something good here. It can be a balance between commercially successful, beneficial for sort of people around it, beneficial for users of the building. And that project is now, it was on the front page of a report called Building Beautiful. It's entirely red brick. It's clad with terracotta. It's a real sort of significant retrofit. But again, if you look back at, I suppose, at critical points, that was, okay, this is becoming more and more the mainstream of how projects are getting looked at. Whereas previously that would have just been fit for demolition or an easy refurb. So yeah, after Wellington, I think it became clear that this idea of retrofit refurbishment was definitely on the sort of top of the agenda for a lot of commercial clients as they were looking at their office buildings. And we started to do more and more of these. And I think because I'd built up that trust with Matt, I'd built up, I suppose, my own version of a kind of narrative on it. I was pushed into these positions of sort of leading the concept on a lot of schemes. And one of those was the Clockwork building over in West London for Giles Morse at Westbrook at the time. And this is, I suppose, the biggest turning point in my professional career, because at this point I was introduced to the Thirdway team. So what was happening on that scheme, we'd done the planning support and effectively a high level concept for a scheme. And what the Thirdway guys were doing is they were taking it on. So they were effectively delivering out the scheme from very little information. And as you go through school, or certainly architecture school, you're taught a little bit that design and build, or certainly fit out, is the devil, or that was the thing at the time, that you have to do everything traditionally because you lose your artistic integrity, you'll lose the quality, all of that.
Control. That was very much the narrative back in that generation.
And I think there probably was some truth in that. But I think, again, if we talk about things aligning, the businesses that were around at that time, or certainly as I got introduced to Thirdway, were really pushing things on. I think there was a huge sort of learning curve and a development at that time. And I was sort of blown away that we were providing really high level stuff and the guys and girls at Thirdway were just getting it done. That was in such contrast to Pete and I and others in the Matt studio spending 5-6 months detailing every doorknob and door hinge for a full stage 4 traditional tender, when in hindsight, looking back at it, the contractor was always going to do it their own way anyway at some point. So that sort of process really opened my eyes to, okay, can something be a little bit different here? Is there a challenge to traditional? And at this point, I met Ben, who is the CEO of Thirdway, and he was in his early 30s. He'd come from a very similar sort of mindset that he never wanted to be a design and build contractor. He'd done law, he'd started on his sort of qualifications, he was working in a prison, and I think it was through his aunt, who worked at a design and build practice around the time of, I suppose, the global financial crisis, that he'd got involved within the design and build world, and just realized that he was quite good at pulling together the two elements. We started chatting. We kept in touch quite a lot about various different things, got on fairly well, and just realized that there was a bit of synergy there. And I think the journey with Matt was always going to come to some sort of an end when you realize that you want to tell your own story.
Sure.
in a really lovely way, the practice is called Matt for a reason.
Yeah, and as an architect, you've been building up, you want to put yourself out into the world.
Yeah, and I think, you want to find your own version of a story, and whether that was through, just pushing on into our own thing or going to partner with someone else.
A quick 15-second pause in today's content to tell you about the amazing work we do at Fidgins. We're a small but powerful team of cost consultants based on Oxford Street and focused on the London commercial sector. We help project managers and end users successfully deliver a vision for their projects. For our smaller schemes, 10,000 square foot and upwards, we offer a neat one-stop solution covering PM, CM and EA roles, which is particularly well suited for fast-paced, budget-constrained projects. We also work with a range of brilliant project managers on larger office fit-outs where we solely provide cost management services. These currently include 2 exciting large occupier schemes, both with build costs in excess of 20 million. Whether you're an end user, an asset manager or a project manager, our only rule is that you're nice to work with, because life's too short to not enjoy your day job. So if you want to find out how we do things differently, send me a message on LinkedIn and we can have a chat. Now, back to the show.
I think I realized it was starting to come towards that time, and it was a cliched stereotype of a sort of drunken Christmas conversation with Ben and the COO Rob, where we just started throwing together an idea of, okay, actually, could you do an architecture practice within the Thirdway group? So at that time, they were starting to venture out into their own bits of development. So they had a few guys come in on a more kind of, I suppose, DM-led approach, where their ideas were partnering with others, reinvesting the balance sheet, things like that. So a bit more kind of speculative thinking. And there were starting to be conversations about, I suppose, a more, let's say, grown up or bigger element of their contracting division as they were growing, to start to take on bigger Cat A work, cut and carve, extension. So the timing felt right. And I think, again, you look at that point, some of the people I'd gone to university with were very, very skeptical. They saw this sort of partnership as, okay, you're selling your soul, you're just going to design and build. I don't think Matt properly understood it at the time. And there was an element of, are we just going to this design and build house to effectively be their detail guys? And that certainly wasn't the case. So Pete, again, hates the story that I did ask him. He said no initially, because he was, again, quite principled. He was working on a project, and I think he was quite blinkered by, I want to get this done. And eventually, when he sort of came around to it, introduced him to Ben, the advice was that you kind of need a 2-man approach. You'll drive yourself mad if you go at it by yourself. Obviously, you're sort of learning that in a different way, Steve. I think you're keeping yourself sane. But the introduction of Pete at that time was really, really great, because I think within each other, we identified our differences. And from the outset, we didn't try to be each other. And again, if you look at the last sort of 8 years of the practice, there have been times where we've maybe strayed off the path by trying to cover for each other's differences or trying to be a different version of ourselves. And we realized that was actually wrong. It's probably the times when the business has gone the wrong way, because we've tried to be someone we weren't. So I've got, I suppose, if we take the color wheel of personalities, I'm in the sort of blue-red category. I like to think, I like to lead, but I'll take a much quieter approach. Pete is absolutely wild. he'll come into a room spinning around, shouting, very sort of inspirational, but actually the balance between
complementary personality.
Absolutely complementary. And I think you wouldn't naturally pair us together sometimes, but from the outset, the two of us literally walking in I think the start of 2017 to the Thirdway sort of office, been quite inspired but quite overwhelmed at the same time by this machine that had sort of been created. I think at this point the group of companies was about up to sort of 90 people, and we'd really sort of like eye-opening in those first few months about just getting things done. That level of just taking an idea, delivering it quickly, delivering it well, but just finding ways to do things that didn't require really long sort of drawn out processes. And I think what our version of architecture was at that time, or trying to be, was the same. So basically our message that we went around talking to clients about was that we were effectively taking traditional architecture and breaking it up, speeding it up where we can. What can you cut out? What can you accelerate? And again, aligned with the Thirdway group at that time, we were able to offer a lot of projects in a sort of turnkey way. And that was an absolute blessing and a curse. A blessing because it has accelerated our portfolio. So by year 2 or 3, we had 6 or 7 significant built projects because they'd sort of gone through this turnkey sort of setup. The curse is that because at that time, actually, we were called Thirdway Architecture. We didn't have a better idea for a name. There was a lot of benefit for taking the brand on, because when a brand is good, people thought we already existed. So we had a little black book of clients that effectively thought we'd been there for some time. And we were able to use them to, again, accelerate that heritage and history. But the curse part of it is that you become so wrapped up that that's the only offering. So a lot of clients where perhaps they'd have a mandate to tender something would be quite conflicted in talking to us because there was a perception that it had to be through this really complicated, or not complicated, but had to be through this architecture plus delivery, plus Thirdway, yeah. And
so at that time, the vast majority of your work was brought to you through Thirdway Group as opposed to from external clients.
Yeah. So in those first couple of years, a lot of the clients had already existed. They'd maybe done a job with Thirdway in the past. Thirdway's sort of backstory is interesting and relevant here because they started out solely doing tenant work, and the story sort of got to a point where a landlord in the sort of Shoreditch area said, "You've done 80% of the fit out in my building. You must know something about what the tenants want. So can you bring some of that energy to the base build?" And around that time, it was as buildings were starting to become a lot more, I suppose, not complicated, but you couldn't just put a rubbish reception desk in anymore. End of journey was becoming more important. Finishes in reception, toilets weren't just sort of white boxes anymore. There was this landlord level of, okay, I need to do a bit more to attract people to my building. And through that, the sort of landlord work has grown to sort of where it is now, that it's kind of 50-50 between tenant and landlord. But we were effectively building on that landlord momentum. So we could, as Thirdway Architecture, so Pete and I, and at this time, we were really lucky to get Amy, who's our associate director, in. I'd studied with her at Westminster and she was at DMFK at the time, so really sort of well-heeled experience, and a number of others into the practice where we were appraising buildings as they were weighing up the refurb. So some of our early projects like Lomond Street, 46 Lomond Street, which is a beautiful sort of Core 10 extension to a project down in Southwark, that was designed and delivered in this sort of turnkey setup. Provost Street, we'd done in the Old Street area, 2-story extension to a Victorian warehouse. All these sort of projects were really moving quite fast. And I think with fast growth comes a point where I suppose something goes wrong or a wheel comes off and things start to strain and stretch a bit. And we were on such an accelerated growth that this turnkey started to become more and more strained. So we were having to hire very quickly. We got up to 30 people, 35 people very quickly within the practice. And
at this point in time, let's not forget, this is your first time running the show. as such.
100%.
It's essentially a new business within a business, but you and Pete, and then within X number of years, you're 30 strong.
When we kind of worked it out, we were sort of hiring a new person every month. Added to exactly what you just said then, we didn't have any formal management training. We didn't have any sort of experience we were able to lean on the group in terms of centralized HR and accounts, which was, I suppose, an absolute godsend thinking about it now, that we weren't having to do that as well. But actually, you do realize that organic growth and considered growth is really important when these sort of stresses and strains happen. And it sort of led to a point where, alongside our growth, the Thirdway delivery team were having to grow equally, if not more, fast, and they were having their own sort of problems. And I think the sort of COVID pandemic was a little bit of a pinch point, in the sense that things got even harder, right?
Sure.
I don't think we need to go into the specifics of it. There's lots that happened that wasn't great for everyone, but I think just the easy processes that you understood before became a lot harder. Clients were under a lot of pressure. The office market generally was under existential threat. Like, would anyone need an office anymore? So the projects we were delivering at that time became quite strained, and effectively led to just a very, very, very grown up decision by the entire group that we'd got to a point where, as you said earlier, a lot of our early projects were coming in via Thirdway leads, and we were starting to do our own. Well, we had our own network now. So this is 4 and a bit years in. We had our own network. We had our own story to tell. We were starting to do projects where they were, and this is a bit of a misconception of the turnkey. From the outset, we were doing projects that were tendered externally. It just wasn't the directive we had. So a lot of our projects at this point were becoming more managed through project managers and QSs. So we were working with external contractors. We were, as a standalone architecture practice, like thriving. We were doing really well. We had a lot of really great stories to tell, but occasionally we were hitting blocks with the name. Occasionally we were hitting blocks with the sort of link. Yeah, the association, and just a lot of it's lazy or misunderstanding, in that when a brand is good, people have a very, very quick perception of it. And a client that we've worked with for a number of years, and a very good friend, Jamie at Feldberg Capital, or Brunswick as they used to be, sort of said to us, and it sticks in my mind so vividly, when we were talking about a rebrand. He said, if you change the name, you get an opportunity for a second line. So the idea that if we said, okay, we're Thirdway Architecture, if people had worked with Thirdway, they knew, or they thought they knew, what Thirdway did. So they might have worked with them before, they might have done a fit out. If we rebranded, we at least got that opportunity to say, oh, we're X, we are blah, blah, blah. And you've got that your own version of a story, even if later the link is still there. So that became, I don't know, a really interesting point. It was discussed very openly around this time. The business as a whole was thinking about how it should restructure out at the back of the pandemic, where office design might not be as relevant, or we'd have to do things in different ways. And a decision was taken at that time to scale back Thirdway's delivery function. So from doing the big, heavy cut and carves and extensions, they realized that they play better and much more successfully in a slightly different field, the field that they were at before. So that division of doing that heavy lifting was brought back, which allowed us a real opportunity to spread our wings. So the rebrand became even more important. So at this time we worked with Stepladder, again, Ben Richardson, good friend of the business, and his team, to come up with a name. And going back to that, I suppose, creative point, you think you can do everything, right? So we were like, why do we need a branding agency? We do this all the time. We can do our own name.
We are creative. We tell stories all the time.
We tell stories. We can do it. Again, Pete and I talk about it. It was such a good moment, because having someone listen to us squabble and ramble for 2 hours, and then coming back with a narrative for us about what we could be. And I think Anomaly was one of the first names on the list, and it absolutely hit the brief perfectly, because we still had that slight, not like indignance, but like a slight aversion to falling into the traditional stereotypes. We'd obviously changed from our slightly younger version where we were trying to stick a middle finger up to everything. We were realizing that some things don't need to be done the same. So it was this challenge to tradition, but not in a as aggressive way. So this idea of an anomaly, if you like, an outlier, was perfect because it spoke to a lot of things. And you mentioned earlier about rebrands and names and people wanting to tell their own things. One thing that was really, really clear from Pete and I is we didn't want it to be Spencer Esposito. I mean, the name sounds great. Like, and again, Stepladder pointed that out.
It does sound like an architecture firm.
You've got a great set of names paired together, but I think our thing was it's never about us, or it was never intended to be about us. Because again, going right back to the start, working with Matt, I was lucky to benefit from his trust in terms of saying, go do this, go do this, go do this, tell your own story. And then that point in which we started to move away from the whole Matt name, it felt really, I mean, yeah, it would be more than ironic if we then called it our names and then had everyone sort of work under that. So the Anomaly thing was perfect because everyone could tell their own version of a story. And if we look at it now, actually that's perfect because we've got people coming in who, yeah, are from an interiors background that really want to challenge their version of what a traditional interior practice is. Everyone can really analogize with their bit of the brand. And if you see on our website or any of our sort of graphics, the sort of second A is spun upside down, and we often swap that out for different images. And that was a really key brand move because it's effectively saying the brand mark is there, the identity is there, but it's changeable. Like things can change, things can move, and we can actually tell lots and lots of different stories. That kind of time and the rebrand was a really key moment. And from there, I suppose, as work started to pick up, we were really lucky or blessed or through hard work at that time to pick up 3 or 4 quite significant projects. So Curtain House in Shoreditch.
And these are external clients as opposed to through group.
Exactly. So that was through Aviva Investors, which is through their climate transition fund. So they purchased Curtain House, which is a grade 2 listed warehouse, and they really wanted to push it through a very sustainably led refurbishment and retrofit, which was fantastic. It was very competitive. We were up against some of our peers and people we'd looked up to, and we were really excited when we were sort of successful in securing that one. And that's now on site. It's kind of working its way through. 49 to 51 East Road, we were introduced to the guys at Kinrise, again, a development company that's very aligned with our narrative. And amongst that, like a number of other projects where we were able to sustainably grow the business back up. So we'd shrunk during the pandemic and really gone down to sort of a core team. I think we got down to maybe from that 35 down to about 10. And we're now at 25. So we've been able to, over the course of the last 2.5-3 years, get that back to a level where we're really sustainable and we've got the ability to do a lot of bid support, because the big thing for us is that kind of commercial underpin. You asked where did those clients come from if they were out of group. Both Pete and I realised the sort of importance of kind of bid support, speculative work, commercial sort of backing when it comes to the start of a project, and actually having a team big enough that you can service your existing clients and existing projects, but you've got that bit of headspace when someone emails you, or one of our KPIs is, are we WhatsApping with people, because it's just so much more instant, it's quicker.
And that's a business in terms of which is quite a rare form of communication, business to business in our sector.
It is.
I mean, we still have it director to director. There's still the WhatsApp that pings around, but as a true form doesn't come around that often.
I think we realised, and again, I don't think it's revolutionary or mind blowing in any way, that it's so important the relationships you have with people in this industry. And again, a lot of the people you've had on this podcast, so Chris Hunt, a good friend of the business, it would be strange to email him a question about something. I think that instant sort of ask that comes with something like WhatsApp is
it's almost like a slightly closer relationship. It's, when you don't really know someone, you send them an email. When you know someone really well and actually you're friends now, well, why would you email? It's a WhatsApp or a FaceTime.
Yeah, I'm terrible with FaceTimes. I'm glad this is just an audio podcast.
I can change it if you want.
Please
don't. Put the video
please don't. But yeah, the why we use it as a sort of KPI is because it's that instantaneous point, because things move very fast. The perfect outcome for us, say someone goes to look at a new building, is they walk around it, they take a photo of it and say, are you looking at X? Or can you look at this building? Check if we're conflicted, if we're looking at it for anyone else. But that idea of, okay, it's literally crossed your mind now that we might be a good fit to work on this project with you. And at that point, both Pete and I can then get back to them very quickly. We can portray it and pass it into the team quite quick and work fast. I think that's the key thing, right? That often these appraisal moments need to actually go quite fast to get to the point. If it's a competitive bidding scenario, or if someone wants to get an edge because something is off market, actually that sort of instantaneous communication is really key. And again, that's been a massive learning curve, that from day one of Thirdway Architecture or Anomaly through to now, actually having those key core relationships that you can rely on are just absolutely vital, because it's how this industry seems to work, and I think will continue to work as it pushes forward.
So in terms of then you guys as a business now, sort of 20 strong?
25
strong. What does sort of the end of this year look like, looking into next? What are you focused on? What are you looking forward to? What do you think are going to be your biggest challenges that you guys as a team are going to look to overcome?
I really hope we're through the hardest bit of the challenge.
Well, let's get through October first.
It's been a drag of a couple of years. Pete and I were talking about it last night, actually, that we're a little bit tired and bored of saying, yeah, things are good. Like we're trying, we're looking at this, we're looking at that. We've probably appraised more buildings than we ever have for people over the last 2 years, and an alarmingly low number have stuck for various different reasons. Buildings aren't trading, appraisals aren't quite making sense. So I think I genuinely think there's a pent-up enthusiasm there. I think over the last 2 months, 3 months, things have got a bit better in terms of stuff really ramping up. I think a lot of our client base have the funds in a really good location to move quite quickly now. I think everyone's bought back into the idea that the office market isn't going to collapse, and actually really good office real estate is good, and that obviously provides us with an amazing opportunity. And then coupled with this absolute front and center mainstream idea that retrofit is right, obviously I'm a little bit salty about it that we were really like doing it 8 years ago, but slightly before it was mainstream. We'll sort of put our flag on the kind of ground that we were there first, and we're sort of good at it. But it's that idea that retrofit is a really good thing. Refurbished principles are great. So I'm just really looking forward to a moment where all this sort of pent up enthusiasm and opportunity comes to something again. Because as you know, in your business, and I think every sort of consultancy business, having a slightly longer runway of secured work is pretty critical to being able to be speculative in other areas. So we're often,
and I think to give you the comfort to have the headspace to go that extra mile on speculative work, and you're in a better place across the board.
And I think, again, not to just keep calling back to Chris's podcast on this, but when he sort of referenced that,
which was a great podcast, and obviously
which is a great podcast. Click and subscribe and all that. Yeah. But his point about sort of just doing more during that bidding process and sort of doing more than everyone else, there is a lot of science in that, in terms of actually being able to just be better, and as you said, have the headspace to really put yourself above your peers. The counterpoint of that is, if you're slightly battle weary, which I think we are at the minute, that we've looked at all these buildings, you can fall into a little bit of a trap of, is this one going to stick? Shall we really go hard at this? So is this just going to be another sort of academic exercise?
The energy is depleted.
Yeah. So I think the tide is turning on that. We've got a fantastic team who really do sort of help. And I think they're all aligned in that they're the same. They want to see things built. They want to do things. They're not here to be paper-based architects or sort of designers like we set out. That was quite key for us when we set out from the start, that we want to get things done and see things happen. So long-winded answer to your question, but I think if all of that heads towards a bit of positivity in the market, I think we'll be in a good place in 25.
I think that's a lovely place to pause. Listen, I really enjoyed that. Thanks ever so much for coming on the show. If people want to get in touch, I mean, they know where you are, but we'll put your details in the show notes below. But look, thanks ever so much for coming on.
No, thank you,
We'll
Steve.
get back on again later next year.
Great stuff.
This podcast is sponsored by Fidgins, a London-based cost consultancy. Please visit fidgins.co.uk to find out more about our market-leading service and some of the amazing clients we get to work with. We're super open to guest recommendations for this podcast, so if there's anyone in the industry you'd like to get on the show, please visit the website or send me a message on LinkedIn and I'll try to make it happen. Thanks, and bye for now.